Hello and welcome back to Reverence for Reverie. And I'm so glad that you're here with me. This episode arrives in a very particular kind of in between. We're sitting right here in between Samhain, which I referenced in the last podcast, just that ancient kind of moment in the turn of the wheel of the year when the veil is said to be thinner, the worlds and realms kind of brush up against each other. It has often been looked at as a time to honor the witches, the mystics, the ancestors, in general, the ones who knew how to listen beneath the surface of things. And on the other side of this week is the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. And that is a day that has really often been wrapped in, soft imagery and nostalgic stories for many Americans. And there's actually a very different reality for Indigenous peoples. And it's a reality that is marked by immense grief and survival and a history that just still echoes through families and land and bodies. So before anything else, I really want to take a moment to name that, to pause with it, to honor the grief that really lives inside of that history, the grief that so many of us were never taught to see. Because I think the version of Thanksgiving that most of us inherited is incomplete. It leaves out the violence, the displacement, the erasure. And for me, I'm not interested in this week, being about celebrating a myth that smooths over the harm done. For me, it is about remembering and remembering the land beneath our feet, remembering the people who cared for it long before this nation even existed, and remembering the histories that didn't just disappear because our storybooks have left them out. Maybe in a quieter and more personal way, this conversation that is about stillness ultimately is a kind of remembering as well. Because stillness is something that I believe colonization in general tried to strip from us. And not just in the physical sense, the relentless demands of labor and production that we're currently very aware of, but also the spiritually, emotionally, physiological ways that this shows up as well. Stillness used to be a part of our rhythms as humans. It lived in our ceremonies, in community, in the turning of the seasons, in our intuition, in the feminine principle. And yet over generations, through force and fear and cultural rewriting and whitewashing, that rhythm was severed. So today, in this kind of liminal space between Samhain and Thanksgiving, I would really like to gently reclaim it with you. I want to explore that kind of stillness that is not passive or indulgent, although I want to be clear, I believe there is room for all of that. But the kind of stillness that is ancestral, the kind of stillness that helps us really remember who we were before urgency became the suffocating air that we breathe. And lately, I've really been noticing just how hard it is for so many of us, myself very much included here, to really slow down. I've been writing about that for the last couple of weeks. If you're a part of my email community, if not, just a quick nudge here to please make sure that you sign up to be a part of that email list. It's completely free, and it is where you get some of my more regular, intimate thoughts and riffs and other reverie. But it's almost strange, when you think about it, how even when the body finally does stop. So when you physically put yourself on a couch or bed, or you step outside with no agenda at all, or maybe you just close the laptop at the end of the day with that tiny moment of triumph. The mind does not always follow you there, right? The body might exhale, but the mind just keeps on sprinting. The to-do lists keep whispering their little demands at you. The world keeps moving. And some quiet, conditioned part of us really fears, I think, that if we stop for too long, everything we're moving towards is somehow going to just evaporate. Like if we start to loosen our grip and slow down a little bit, we're going to lose our place in line. Isn't that what colonization has sold us? Capitalism has sold us, right? That rest equals regression. And as I talk about this, I think about not long ago, I gave myself an entire weekend, really, like a real entire weekend, with the intention of no work, no planning, no content creation, no sneaky catching up at night in those in-between spaces, just space to breathe, to rest. And you know what? What I found was not rest at all. It was restlessness. Even when my body was lying perfectly still, my nervous system felt like a live wire, like this low voltage kind of electric current that was just subtly humming under my ribs. And I think in that moment, there's kind of a tender unease to that. There was something in me that really began to recognize what was happening here. This was not simply personal. It wasn't just a my issue kind of thing or a flaw in my character, as I have often wanted to believe. And I know many clients, I sit with a multitude of them who believe that about themselves as well. This actually isn't even about work, what I'm describing to you. What I started to recognize is this is an inheritance. I think of the lineage that I'm aware of. My grandmother was someone who didn't stop moving. In my childhood, my fondest memories of her, she was always doing something around the home. My mom, while that took a little different form, very similarly, she always kept going. She was always working on something, always obtaining another something for her education, right? So what I was experiencing and what I recognize that I bring into my own life all too easily is cultural, and it is ancestral, and it is systemic. It's the residue of what this world has taught us explicitly in all of the ways that we can name, but also implicitly in all of the ways that we have just subtly internalized throughout the centuries, right? That stillness is dangerous. Slowing down is suspicious, that rest needs to be earned or you're lazy, right? That pausing is like the first step to becoming completely irrelevant, right? That sort of evaporative feeling that I referred to a moment ago. So the more I let myself be with that restlessness, the more I could feel that lineage, the way it did not just start with me. It was the nervous system that is shaped by colonization, by capitalism, urgency, survival, trauma, and sort of the punishing expectation that I've taken in to always be in motion. It's a voice that I've inherited throughout generations, right? Layered. It is layered into our collective psyche until it feels like it's actually our own voice, but it isn't. And I think the moment that you really begin to see that you let yourself really be with it, the moment that you recognize this restlessness is actually inherited, I think something in you can begin to soften. That is, if you let it, of course. Something can unhook. I think something can start to begin to remember another way. Because somewhere along the way, somewhere in all of these centuries behind us, the wisdom of slow, intuitive rhythm was stripped from us. Indigenous cultures always were honoring and still honor the cycles of the land and of time. Life moved in ceremony and in seasonality. We might say in the kind of rise and fall of the earth's own breathing, our mother, right? Rest was not seen as a luxury. It was responsibility. It was a way of staying in right relationship with the land and with your community and with spirit. And the feminine principle, and I want to be clear here, I'm not referring to gender, but the archetype of intuition, receptivity, dream work, cyclical knowing, that was recognized as a form of intelligence. It was part of how our communities survived and healed and grew. And then along comes colonization. And in its wake came an entirely different worldview where extraction, domination, productivity as your worth, constant output, all of that became the norm. A worldview where your stillness is seen as laziness, where cyclical time is a threat to profit, where listening inward is a deviation from the so-called order of logic. And I want to really take a moment to acknowledge the ways that colonization didn't just take the land. I think so often that is where our mind goes when we think about our history classes. Settlers moving onto land that wasn't theirs in the first place. But it was not just about land. That colonization took rhythm. It took ceremony away. It took tradition. It took relationship between people and place. It replaced it with urgency and with feelings of scarcity and surveillance. And with that worldview also came something else eventually. I'm thinking of the witch hunts as I mentioned here in the beginning, being right between Samhain and Thanksgiving, where whole generations of particularly women, but not just women, were punished for carrying intuitive, earth-based feminine wisdom, like rest and ritual, gathering, dreaming, all of that being criminalized. The feminine principle completely severed from legitimacy in our Western psyche. And here's the thing. Even if history like that feels really far away, its imprint certainly is not. It lives in our nervous systems. It lives in the tightening of the chest when we try to slow down, in the panic that you feel of if you stop, you're going to somehow lose value, in the restlessness that ends up greeting us in the moment silences arrive, just like what I was describing in my own experience a moment ago. And we need to recognize this is not a failure on our part. This is an inheritance that we need to look at and reckon with and grieve. And for me, I do feel that inheritance in a particular kind of way. Part of my lineage comes from those who were colonized, the ones who knew displacement, erasure, forced assimilation. In fact, as I name this, I also must name that I don't even know the fullness of that because the stories have been whitewashed and blotted out in our history. My family, with regard to our indigenous roots, I know somewhat of the Irish, land-based heritage. And there's some sort of whispers of indigenous Native American history, but it's really held in one single photograph of a great great grandmother that has very long beaded hair. That's all we have, with a bit of a story of she supposedly walked the Trail of Tears. But again, there is nothing, there was so much shame around it that the family did not even bring the story forward, right? So on one hand, I've got that going on. On the other hand, I come from those who are also colonizers, European descent, German descent even, the ones who actually really benefited from systems of domination and harm. So when I speak about this, I really am speaking from a place of reckoning, of sitting in the complexity it takes to hold both stories in my blood, knowing that I carry the memory of loss and the memory of power, that both shape the way my nervous system relates to rest, to stillness, to enoughness. I think it's why I often feel so much conflict as I feel the pull between both parts of me. This is also why I'm telling you right now that when you struggle to slow down, I do not believe it's because you're broken. It's because your body remembers what our history has demanded in order to survive. But I also think that the remembering, the capacity to remember that also means that you can choose a different kind of rhythm now. So when you find yourself trying to rest and you notice your whole system tightening, or when your chest contracts and your breath gets shallow, or your mind starts pacing, I'd like us to gently consider that isn't a character flaw. It is the imprint of a world that has learned to survive by punishing our stillness, a world that has equated slowness with danger, with lack, with scarcity, a world where your ancestors, and mine too, were taught explicitly or implicitly that stopping meant vulnerability and that we shouldn't do it. And I think the deeper truth beneath all of that is that stillness is not the absence of movement. Stillness is actually where real movement even begins. In that clearing space, the softening, the sort of internal rearranging that begins to happen. And it's a place where everything you've been holding finally has permission to settle. In many ways, I think stillness is where the psyche begins to really digest experience, like a sacred pause where our unconscious is saying, thank God you've stopped long enough for me to do something with all of this. You know, you could think of it kind of like waking dreaming, if you will, because during the day, we are taking in millions of bits of impressions and information, things we can't possibly process moment by moment. Every conversation, every task that we do, every emotion we didn't fully feel. I mean, you name it, we're taking it all in. And at night, the psyche starts to sort them into symbols and stories so that they don't overwhelm our system. Stillness, I believe, in waking life has a bit of the same effect, not to the fullness of the extent, but it is a sort of psychic sorting or allowing for things to begin to surface. You know, the nervous system exhales. There's a spiritual integration that maybe has an opportunity to start to come forward, right? It's the moment when your inner world is finally catching up to the velocity of your outer world, right? And from a nervous system perspective, stillness is actually at the beginnings of regulation. Now, there's a lot more that goes into the capacity to regulate. So that's a different conversation for a different day. It's more complex than just sit still and you'll be regulated. That's absolutely not the case. But it is the body attempting to return to some sort of natural rhythm. Heart rate, breath, brain waves, they all begin to harmonize. This is coherence. This is where our coherence can have the opportunity to increase, right? Inflammation decreases when we are resting. Creativity has the opportunity to come back on as our prefrontal cortex comes out of survival mode. Our intuition returns as all of the noise and continuous input begins to quiet enough for that subtle knowing to start to rise within us. And the field around you begins to reorganize itself into a little bit more clarity rather than all of the chaos and fragmentation. But because we've been so conditioned into our adrenaline, and because urgency has become this sort of, I don't know, like inherited religion is what it feels like, that stillness can feel like a withdrawal. It can feel so uncomfortable, foreign, even threatening to us. We have been trained to believe that if nothing visible is happening, nothing meaningful is happening. But I want to just state to you right now, I believe that stillness is never empty. It is actually very full of recalibration, full of organization, reorganization, full of the kind of movement that you can only feel on the inside of you. This is reminding me of a small picture in my office that says, "The silence isn't empty, it's full of answers." I genuinely believe that. And for those that might consider themselves high achievers, leaders of some sort, for those of us who have spent years, sometimes even decades, just moving with purpose and producing constantly and with precision and always trying to stay 3 steps ahead, stillness can feel especially disorienting because your identity, some part of you, has been built on the doing. And rest then can feel like a threat. It can feel like erasure. Like, who are you? What are you if you aren't doing something? Like you're going to disappear. Like the world will move ahead without you. Silence can feel like insignificance then, like you have lost your voice or your momentum or your place in the world. Pausing can feel like you're backsliding, like the ground that you've worked so hard to gain will quietly slip away. But you see, that is the illusion. It's the ego that is interpreting stillness through this lens of survival conditioning rather than truth. Because what looks like nothing from the outside is everything on the inside. The moment the psyche finally has space to metabolize what you've taken in, it's the moment your nervous system begins recalibrating to a frequency that might actually be able to sustain you if you'd slow down long enough to feel that. It's the moment that this, field around you, the unconscious field, your relational, your energetic, your creative field starts to reorganize and clear out the static and prepare you for what's next. Breakthroughs don't usually arrive in motion. They appear in all of the pause after the effort, in the silence that follows your output. When the field finally has room to bring forward what's actually been forming underneath it the whole time. There's a reason why we get some of our best thoughts in the shower or while we're driving, because it's in those moments precisely that we can kind of go on autopilot, and we often aren't having more and more stimulation and input. Although I know some of us still are doing that these days with the advancing of technology. But it's in those moments where things can just sort of rise up. I also want you to think of nature. After the harvest, which we are in a harvest season right now, comes sort of a fallow season. The soil is not producing constantly year round. It has actually regenerating during those seasons. It begins to restore the nutrients. It rebuilds its structure, prepares itself for new life and new growth. Our trees draw their energy inward into the winter, right? And they go dormant. They aren't dying, even if it looks like a bit of a death happening, but they're actually conserving and strengthening and deepening their roots. Nothing in nature blooms nonstop, nothing. And yet somehow we've been sold a lie. We expect ourselves to bloom constantly, like constant spring is somehow the mark of success, as if we aren't made of the exact same cycles that the earth is made of. Stillness is recalibration. It's the body saying, I'm getting ready for what is next. And it's our psyche saying, my God, I cannot integrate at this speed. You've got to slow down, right? And I think it's a return to natural rhythm, to indigenous rhythm, to feminine rhythm, to just the innate embodied wisdom that guided humans long before urgency became this suffocating air that we breathe, like I mentioned earlier. Stillness is the rhythm we belonged to before the world was demanding that we abandon ourselves. And every time we choose it, even if it's for 1 minute, we're reclaiming something that is ancient, something that the world has tried to sever, something that's never actually left us. This is where I would say rest is resistance. There's something else that I'd like to name here, something that really I've been sitting with for a few months. It's only begun to reveal itself to me more and more recently. This past summer, my family and I traveled through the Badlands and the Black Hills in South Dakota. And if you have been there, the land, well, number one, it's beautiful, but it feels so ancient. It is ancient, of course, but it's almost like you can feel, at least I could feel, like the memory. And I went hoping for rest. In some ways I did rest. I want to name that. But I also was right in the middle of finishing this major project. And it was a big push right there at the end that had required so much energy and focus on my part. And I kept sneaking in these little pockets of work whenever I could throughout our vacation. And it was kind of like that subtle voice that I've referred to, just kind of whispering to me in the background, like, just finish this one little thing, stay ahead, hold on to this momentum, almost done, right? Like you can't slow down here. You're right here at the end. And then we visited the Crazy Horse Museum. And it is, if you're unaware of what that is, it is the sculpture that is being carved into the side of a mountain near Mount Rushmore, but it is of Chief Crazy Horse. And there's also a visitor center and a museum. And so we went there as a family. And, you know, as I stepped in really onto the land in that area, I felt something shift. It felt like an ancestral calling. I mean, there really is no other way that I can put it. There was certainly a pull to be present, to reverence, to listening. I walked through the artwork and the carvings and the beads and the leather, and I looked out across the land, just absolutely beautiful. And I just really felt myself drop fully into my body. There was full presence. And they were having this demonstration that day. It was of a traditional Native American Lakota hoop dance. And I was really excited. I was excited to witness something that I know is so full of life and artistry and meaning and storytelling. And so the performer took the stage. She explained that this was a celebration dance, that it was a dance of joy, of storytelling, and also of lineage, right? That is carried on through movement, and that there aren't a whole lot of people that continue to do the traditional hoop dances, but she has dedicated her life to carrying this tradition on and passing it on to others. And as the drumming began and the kind of vocal call that was a part of the music, I began to weep. I wasn't sobbing, but it also was not like polite little tears, streaming one by one down my face, and not the kind of cinematic tears where you're just feeling like touched by something. I mean, like a deep, surprising, truly disorienting level of tears that rose from a place that I really could not consciously locate. My conscious mind was actually very confused. I knew I was here. I was watching this celebratory dance. I was actually feeling the joy of it, the vibrancy of it. Like that was so apparent. It did not feel like something to grieve. And yet something deeper in me was in fact grieving. I was grieving something that I couldn't even name, grieving something that I had not expected, and grieving something that felt so much older and so much bigger than me. I remember my spouse coming up to me and my children even, and saying like, "Mom, what's going on? Is everything okay?" And all I could say was, I feel completely fine. Like I don't actually know why I'm crying. Um, I had enough awareness about me to know this felt like the gap of what I couldn't possibly know, but lived within me genetically, right? And to this day, I still don't know exactly what that was. Psychoanalytically, I think of a lot of different things, the ways that um, that historical trauma and the transmission intergenerationally of stories lives in our blood and in our bones, truly. And I don't want to project meaning where I don't have clarity, but what I do know is this: something very deep within me awakened on that day. And instead of running from it, I leaned into it. That moment has stuck with me. It has taken me so much deeper into my own decolonizing practices, deeper into reckoning with my own lineage and the way that I hold these different parts within me, and much deeper into the truth of what my body actually carries and remembers that I may not have conscious access to. And that is precisely what stillness does. It reveals what our motion has allowed us to outrun. Sometimes the reason we don't rest is actually because rest brings us closer to truths that we have avoided, even if we didn't know that we were avoiding them. When we slow down, the grief we've been postponing finally has a chance to catch up to us. And all of the clarity that maybe we've been resisting begins to speak to us. Maybe it's even the identity that needs to dissolve starts to actually show itself to us. What I'm saying is that stillness reveals, and the ego may not always be ready for what the soul has already decided to shed. So we keep moving. And it's not just because we're inspired. It's because we are afraid that if we pause, the truth will rise to meet us, and it will. And we fear that. We fear the grief, the knowing, the shift we sense is coming. Here's the thing though. Truth is patient. It waits in the quiet. It waits in the breath. It waits for the moment when we finally become courageous enough to listen. And if we don't become courageous enough to listen, it comes out somewhere. So if you find yourself in a season where there are things that are quieter than usual for you, maybe inspiration feels slow, or your next step feels really foggy, maybe it feels like life is rearranging itself around you without your permission, I want to offer this gently to you. Maybe nothing is wrong. Maybe you're not losing momentum and not falling behind. Maybe you're not disconnected from your purpose at all. Maybe what's happening is you're actually integrating what has already been set in motion. Maybe your spirit has already initiated something that your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Maybe you're in the middle of a becoming you just can't yet see. I think this is the wisdom of Samhain, the descent into the unseen, the turning inward, the listening to what moves below the surface. It's the time of year when nature itself is saying, we're going to go down into the descent before we rise again. And I think it's also grief that is held inside Thanksgiving, the remembering of what was harmed, what was taken, what still needs healing. And I think it's the acknowledgement that gratitude without truth is just a soft blanket over a deep, painful, festering wound. So the invitation today is to slow down and listen. To listen to the ways the ancients listened. To listen the way that the land listens. To listen to the inner world with the same kind of reverence that we seem to give to the outer one. And to honor what's beneath the surface. The feelings we've avoided, the truths we've postponed, the grief we've inherited but have never been able to name. To reclaim what was once forbidden in us, the rest, and intuition, ritual, cycles, slowness, feminine knowing, emotional depth. To return to rhythm, your rhythm, the earth's rhythm, the ancestral rhythm that existed way before urgency, before productivity, before the world demanded that we harden. Our stillness is not empty. It is the remembering. So this week, I would like to offer you just a simple reflection. It doesn't require analysis or effort, just honesty within yourself. Where might stillness actually be your next evolution? I'll say that again. Where might stillness actually be your next evolution? Where could the pause, the quiet, the slowness, the space you've been resisting be the place where something sacred begins to shift in you? And another question, if you feel called to sit with it, where could pausing actually be the portal and not the problem? Where might the very thing that you're afraid to stop doing be the thing that's asking to be surrendered so that something truer within you can take form? So let's end here and just take a breath with me. A deep inhale and an exhale, maybe with a sigh. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe let your jaw soften. Feel your feet wherever they're touching the ground. Can you let yourself feel the rhythm beneath the noise? The one that exists when the world stops shouting at you. The one that does not need your performance to be valid. The one that's been there your entire life and is waiting for you to return. Because I don't think you're falling behind. I don't think you're losing your edge. You're not out of alignment. I think you are becoming. We're all becoming quietly, deliberately, in ways we may not be able to name yet. But your body does know. So can you let yourself remember? We'll end here for today. And just a reminder, if you'd like to join the waitlist for the community that I'm building, where we can kind of commune together and have thoughtful reflection around these kinds of ideas and more, please join the waitlist. It is in the show notes. Also, if you're not on my email list yet, a part of my email community, I'd love to have you join me there as well, which is where I give more of my writings and just sort of riffs. I call it riffs, reverie, and reflections. It's kind of a behind the scenes and just reflective pieces that I send out at least weekly. That will also be in the show notes. Again, I appreciate you joining me here today on Reverence for Reverie. And of course, until next time, let the reverie lead you. Bye for now.